Sometimes, the smallest mistake in your life is actually the door to everything you were meant to become. The rain had been falling over Manhattan since dawn, turning the city into a blur of silver reflections and glowing headlights. People hurried beneath umbrellas. Taxi horns echoed between glass towers. And inside a crowded cafe just 3 blocks from Central Park, Emily Carter was already running 20 minutes behind. At 26 years old, Emily had mastered the art of moving quickly without drawing attention. She carried plates, refilled coffee cups, memorized complicated orders, and smiled through exhaustion. Most customers never remembered her name. Some barely looked at her at all. But that morning felt different. The lunch rush had arrived early. Every table was full. The line at the register stretched nearly to the door. Steam rose from espresso machines. Ceramic cups clinked against saucers. Voices overlapped into a constant wall of noise. Emily balanced a tray against one hand and checked the receipt tucked beneath it. 2 cappuccinos. 1 black coffee. 1 blueberry muffin. Table 12. Simple. At least it should have been. Emily, I need you at the front counter, her manager called. Coming, she answered. She turned too quickly. A customer stepped sideways without looking. Another server crossed her path carrying a tray of sandwiches. For a split second, everything happened at once. The tray tilted. The coffee cup slid. Emily's eyes widened. No, hot coffee splashed across a dark navy overcoat. The cup struck the floor. The cafe went silent. Not completely. The city outside still hummed. The espresso machines still hissed. But inside Emily's world, everything stopped. Her stomach dropped. She stared at the stranger standing in front of her. The man looked to be in his early 40s. Tall, calm, well-dressed, but not flashy. No designer logos. No expensive jewelry visible. Just a simple silver watch peeking from beneath his sleeve. Dark hair touched with the faintest trace of gray at the temples. The kind of face that carried confidence without needing attention. Coffee dripped slowly from the front of his coat. Emily immediately grabbed a stack of napkins. I'm so sorry, she said. I am so sorry. The man looked down at the stain, then at her trembling hands, then back into her eyes. Emily waited for anger, for frustration, for the sharp voice of someone about to demand a manager. Instead, he simply asked, Are you okay? She blinked. What? You almost fell. His voice was steady. Are you hurt? Emily stared at him, confused. Nobody had ever asked her that after an accident. Usually people worried about the coffee, or the clothes, or the inconvenience. Not the waitress. I'm fine, she managed. But your coat. The stranger glanced at it again. It'll survive. Around them, customers slowly returned to their conversations. The noise of the cafe came back to life. But something felt different now. The man accepted the napkins. He cleaned a small spot near his sleeve. Then he looked at her one more time. Not with annoyance. Not with pity. With curiosity. What's your name, he asked. Emily. A faint smile appeared. Nice to meet you, Emily. Then he walked toward a corner table near the window and sat down alone. Emily stood frozen beside the shattered silence of that moment, unaware that the stranger she had just drenched in coffee controlled a business empire worth more than $10 billion, and even more unaware that before the week was over, he would change the direction of her entire life. The rest of the shift passed in a blur, but Emily could not stop thinking about the man by the window. Every time she glanced in that direction, he was still there, not scrolling through his phone, not rushing through a meeting, not typing on a laptop like most customers in Manhattan. He simply sat quietly, watching the rain slide down the glass. Occasionally, he would look outside. Occasionally, he would sip his coffee. And once or twice, Emily caught him studying the room itself, as if he were paying attention to details everyone else ignored. It was strange. Most customers came for coffee. Some came for conversation. Others came to escape the weather. But there was something different about him. He seemed completely comfortable doing nothing at all. By 3 o'clock, the lunch crowd had faded. Empty chairs replaced the noise. The scent of fresh coffee lingered in the air. Emily finally had a moment to breathe. She carried a tray of clean cups toward the service station when her coworker Rachel nudged her shoulder. Your mystery customer is still here. Emily glanced toward the window. The man had not moved. Maybe he is waiting for someone. Rachel followed her gaze. 4 hours? Emily laughed softly. Good point. Rachel lowered her voice. You know, most people would have made a huge scene after what happened this morning. Please do not remind me. I am serious. That coat looked expensive. Emily sighed. Trust me, I know. She had replayed the accident in her mind at least 50 times already. Every slip, every second, every drop of coffee. The memory still made her stomach tighten. Yet somehow the stranger had reacted with more kindness than many customers showed on an ordinary day. That was the part she could not understand. A few minutes later, Emily noticed his coffee cup was nearly empty. She hesitated, then walked over. Can I get you a refill? She asked. The man looked up from the notebook resting beside his cup. Emily had not noticed it before. Several pages were covered with neat handwriting. Please, he said. Thank you. She poured fresh coffee. On the house this time. A small smile appeared. Trying to make up for earlier? Heat crept into Emily's cheeks. Maybe a little. The man chuckled softly. Not mocking. Not arrogant. Just amused. You know, he said, most people spend more energy hiding mistakes than admitting them. Emily set the pot down. I do not think pretending they never happened makes them disappear. His expression shifted slightly, as if that answer mattered more than she realized. That is a rare opinion. Maybe, she shrugged, or maybe I just cannot afford to pretend. For a moment neither spoke. Rain tapped gently against the window. Traffic crawled through the wet streets outside. Then the man reached for the check. Emily quickly shook her head. You have been here all afternoon. There is no rush. I know. He folded the receipt and slipped it into his coat pocket. But I should let you get home. Eventually. Emily smiled politely. I still have 3 hours left. The stranger stood. He placed enough cash on the table to cover the bill and a generous tip. Far more than necessary. Then he picked up his notebook. Have a good evening, Emily. You too. He started toward the door before stopping halfway. Turning back, he studied her for one brief moment. Not the way customers usually looked at servers. Not through her. At her. As if trying to solve a question. Then he nodded once and disappeared into the rain. Emily watched the door close behind him. She assumed that would be the end of it. Just another customer. Just another strange day in Manhattan. She had no way of knowing that before sunset tomorrow, that same man would walk back into her life, carrying a mystery far bigger than either of them expected. The next afternoon began like any other. Gray clouds still hung over Manhattan, and the sidewalks glistened from a night of steady rain. Emily arrived 15 minutes early for her shift, hoping for a quiet day. She tied her apron, tucked a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear, and stepped onto the cafe floor. For the first hour, nothing unusual happened. Customers came and went. Orders were called out. Coffee steamed beneath warm lights. The familiar rhythm of work slowly pushed yesterday's strange encounter into the background. Almost. Because every time the front door opened, a small part of her looked up. Not that she expected to see him again. People drifted through New York like weather. Briefly present, then gone. Around noon, Emily was wiping down a recently vacated table near the window when she noticed something tucked beneath a ceramic sugar holder. A plain white envelope. No stamp. No address. Just one word written neatly across the front. Emily. Her heart skipped. She glanced around the cafe. Nobody seemed to be watching. What is that? Rachel asked, appearing beside her. Emily turned the envelope over. I have no idea. Carefully, she opened it. Inside was a single folded receipt. Nothing else. No letter. No explanation. No signature. Emily unfolded the paper. Her eyes widened. It was a dry cleaning invoice from one of the most expensive garment care services in Manhattan. At the bottom, the balance had already been paid in full. Included was a note from the company confirming that the damaged coat had been professionally restored. Emily stared at the receipt, then at the empty envelope, then back at the receipt again. What is it? Rachel asked. Emily handed it over. Rachel read it twice. Wait, somebody paid for their own coat. Apparently, after you spilled coffee on it. Emily nodded slowly. Rachel looked genuinely confused. Who does that? That was exactly the question Emily could not answer. Most people would have demanded compensation. Some would have insisted on speaking to management. Others might have made her feel guilty for weeks. Instead, this stranger had quietly handled everything himself. No complaints. No lectures. Not even a request for reimbursement. Just a receipt left behind without a name. The more Emily thought about it, the stranger it seemed. The afternoon passed, but the envelope stayed in her locker. She found herself thinking about it between orders, during breaks, even while riding the subway home later that evening. By the time she reached her apartment in Queens, curiosity had replaced confusion. She lived in a modest fourth-floor walk-up overlooking a narrow street lined with aging brick buildings. Nothing fancy, but it was home. After paying bills, helping her mother with groceries, and stretching every dollar as far as possible, there was rarely room in Emily's life for mysteries. Yet this one refused to leave her alone. Later that night, she sat by the window with a cup of tea and unfolded the receipt once more. For the first time, she noticed something she had missed earlier. In the lower corner was a small handwritten message. Just 4 words. Neat. Precise. Almost impossible to notice. Mistakes deserve grace too. Emily read the sentence again. And again. A faint smile appeared despite herself. Somewhere in the city, the stranger had taken the time to leave those words. But what Emily did not know was that at that exact moment, several miles away in a quiet office overlooking the Manhattan skyline, the same man was studying a report with her name on it, and the questions he was asking about Emily Carter were only beginning. The following afternoon, Emily arrived at the cafe carrying more questions than answers. The mysterious receipt remained folded inside her bag. She had considered throwing it away at least 3 times. Yet every time she reached for it, those 4 handwritten words echoed in her mind. Mistakes deserve grace too. Few people spoke that way anymore. Manhattan moved too fast for grace. People measured value in schedules, profits, and opportunities. But somehow a stranger had taken a simple accident and turned it into something she could not stop thinking about. The cafe filled steadily throughout the day. Business meetings occupied the larger tables. Tourists escaped the chilly weather outside. Students sat near electrical outlets, surrounded by textbooks and half-finished drinks. Everything seemed normal until a little after 2 o'clock. The front door opened. Emily looked up automatically. Her pulse quickened. The stranger had returned. He wore a charcoal gray coat this time. No stain. No sign that anything had ever happened. The silver watch remained on his wrist. The calm expression remained on his face. He walked directly toward the same corner table beside the window. Not hurried. Not distracted. Purposeful. Emily tried to focus on work. She really did. Yet somehow she noticed every detail. The way he thanked the cashier. The way he held the door for an elderly customer entering behind him. The way he seemed completely comfortable sitting alone without reaching for a phone every 30 seconds like everyone else. Nearly an hour passed before their paths crossed. Emily approached with a coffee pot. Refill, she asked. The stranger looked up and smiled slightly. Please. She filled his cup. Neither spoke for a moment. Then he glanced toward the notebook resting beside his hand. Can I ask you something? Emily hesitated. Depends on the question. His smile widened. Fair answer. He closed the notebook. What did you want to be before this? Emily blinked. Before what? Before this became your life. The question caught her off guard. Most customers asked about menu items. Some asked where the restroom was. Nobody asked about forgotten dreams. Emily glanced toward the counter. That is a complicated answer. The best ones usually are. She considered walking away. Instead, she surprised herself. I studied business administration for 2 years. The stranger listened carefully. What happened? Life happened. She offered a small smile. Tuition. Bills. My mother's health. The usual things people do not plan for. He nodded slowly. Not with sympathy. With understanding. Somehow that felt different. More respectful. Do you miss it? He asked. Emily looked toward the rain streaking down the window. Sometimes. Only sometimes. A quiet laugh escaped her. Fine. Every day. The stranger leaned back in his chair. For a brief moment, something thoughtful crossed his face. As if her answer had confirmed a theory he had been testing. Then he changed the subject completely, asking about her favorite books, her neighborhood, and whether she preferred sunrise or sunset. Strange questions, yet oddly comfortable ones. By the time another customer called her away, nearly 15 minutes had passed. Emily returned to work feeling unexpectedly lighter. What she did not know was that after she walked away, the stranger opened his notebook and wrote a single sentence beneath her name. Intelligent, honest, resilient. Then he closed the notebook and looked out at the Manhattan skyline, already planning a conversation that would change everything. For the next several days, a pattern began to form. The stranger appeared almost every afternoon at nearly the same time. He always chose the corner table by the window. He always ordered coffee. And somehow, despite the constant rush of customers, His presence slowly became part of the rhythm of Emily's day. She still did not know his name. He never volunteered it. Yet their conversations grew longer. One afternoon they discussed books. Another day they debated whether success came from talent or persistence. Sometimes he asked questions that seemed simple at first, but lingered in her mind long after her shift ended. Questions about purpose, about regret, about what people would do if failure were impossible. The strange thing was that he listened, really listened. Most people waited for their turn to speak. He did not. One rainy Thursday, Emily arrived carrying a worn folder she had found while cleaning her apartment. Inside were old college papers, business projects, and academic awards she had not looked at in years. She had almost thrown them away. Instead, she brought them with her, unsure why. During a quiet moment in the afternoon, she sat alone in the employee break room flipping through the pages. Financial analyses, marketing strategies, research presentations, reminders of a life she once imagined for herself. A knock on the partially open door startled her. Emily looked up. The stranger stood there holding his coffee cup. "I did not mean to interrupt." She quickly closed the folder. "You are not." His eyes briefly settled on the papers. "Old memories?" Emily smiled faintly. "Something like that." He remained silent for a moment. Then he asked, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if things had gone differently?" Emily laughed softly. Every adult in New York wonders that at least once a week. The stranger nodded. "Fair point." She looked down at the folder. "I used to think I had everything planned. Graduate, build a career, help my mother retire, buy a small house someday. And now," Emily folded one of the papers carefully, "now I focus on getting through the month." There was no bitterness in her voice, just honesty. The stranger seemed to notice that. Most people become cynical after life changes their plans. Emily shrugged. Being angry does not pay the rent. For a second, he looked away toward the rain outside. Then he said something unexpected. "You know what I think?" Emily raised an eyebrow. "What?" "I think you are still the same person who made those plans. The circumstances changed. You did not." The words landed somewhere deeper than she expected. Nobody had said something like that to her in years. Not friends, not coworkers, not even herself. Before she could respond, her manager called her back to the floor. Emily gathered the folder and stood. "Thank you." The stranger gave a small nod. "For what?" She smiled. "For reminding me that I had dreams before I had bills." As she walked away, she did not notice the thoughtful expression that crossed his face. But later that evening, after the cafe closed and the city lights reflected across the wet streets below, the stranger sat alone in a private office high above Manhattan. A confidential file remained open on his desk. At the top was a photograph of Emily Carter. Beneath it were pages of information he had quietly gathered over the past week. Education, employment history, academic records, volunteer work. He closed the folder slowly. Then he picked up his phone and made a call. "Schedule a meeting for next week," he said. "I think I have finally found the person we have been looking for." The following Tuesday started like any other shift. Emily arrived just before noon, tied her apron, and prepared herself for another busy afternoon. She expected customers. She expected coffee orders. She expected long hours on her feet. What she did not expect was the envelope waiting for her in the manager's office. "This came for you," her manager said, handing it over. "Looks important." Emily frowned. She rarely received mail at work. Carefully, she opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of heavy cream-colored paper. No company logo, no advertisement, no obvious explanation. Just a brief message. "Ms. Emily Carter, you are invited to attend a private business luncheon this Friday at 1 o'clock. Formal attire requested. Transportation will be provided if needed. Additional details enclosed." Emily stared at the letter. Then she read it again and again. Attached was a reservation confirmation for one of the most exclusive hotels in Manhattan. The kind of place she had only seen in magazines. "What is it?" Rachel asked from the doorway. Emily handed her the invitation. Rachel's eyes nearly doubled in size. "You are joking." "I wish I was." "Who sends something like this?" Emily shook her head. "There is no name." The rest of the day passed in a haze of confusion. Between orders and coffee refills, her mind kept returning to the invitation. There had to be a mistake. Maybe someone had the wrong Emily Carter. Maybe it was some strange marketing event. Maybe it was not meant for her at all. Yet deep down, she suspected otherwise. Later that afternoon, the stranger appeared once again at his usual table by the window. For the first time since they met, Emily approached him carrying more questions than confidence. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He looked up from his notebook. "Of course." Emily placed the invitation on the table. "Do you know anything about this?" For a brief moment, something flickered behind his calm expression. Not surprise. Recognition. Then it disappeared. "Interesting invitation," he said. Emily folded her arms. "That is not an answer." A faint smile touched his face. "No, it is not." She studied him carefully. "You know more than you are telling me." The stranger remained silent for several seconds. Then he leaned back in his chair. "Would you go?" Emily blinked. "What? Would you attend?" She looked down at the invitation. "Honestly, I do not know." "Why not?" Emily laughed softly. "Because people like me do not usually get invited to places like that." The stranger's expression changed. Just slightly. But enough. "Maybe that is exactly why you should go." His answer stayed with her for the rest of the evening. After her shift ended, she rode the subway home beneath the glow of fluorescent lights and the rumble of steel wheels. The invitation remained folded inside her purse. By the time she reached her apartment, she had almost convinced herself not to attend. Then she remembered something he had said days earlier. The circumstances changed. You did not. Sitting beside her apartment window, watching city lights shimmer against the dark skyline, Emily finally made her decision. She would go. She had no idea that the luncheon was not a coincidence, not a mistake, and not a random invitation. It was the next move in a plan quietly set in motion by the stranger, and by accepting, Emily had just stepped onto a path that would reveal who he truly was. Friday arrived colder than expected. A sharp autumn wind moved through Manhattan, rattling yellow leaves across polished sidewalks and glass-covered plazas. Emily stood in front of her bedroom mirror for nearly 20 minutes before finally deciding that the navy blue dress she had worn to a cousin's wedding 3 years earlier would have to do. It was simple, modest, far from the designer fashion she imagined people would wear at a private luncheon in one of the city's most exclusive hotels. Yet it was the best she had. As noon approached, a black sedan arrived exactly where the invitation had instructed. The driver greeted her by name and opened the rear door. Emily hesitated before stepping inside. The leather seats, the quiet ride, even the bottle of water waiting beside her felt like a glimpse into a world she had never belonged to. 20 minutes later, the car pulled beneath the grand entrance of the hotel. Crystal chandeliers glowed behind towering glass doors. Uniformed staff welcomed arriving guests. Men and women in tailored suits moved confidently through the lobby. Emily suddenly became aware of every detail about herself. Her shoes, her dress, her nervous hands. She nearly turned around. Then she remembered why she had come. Curiosity, nothing more. A hostess guided her toward a private dining room overlooking Central Park. As the doors opened, Emily stopped walking. Nearly every seat was occupied. Executives, investors, business leaders, people who looked as though they managed companies rather than coffee orders. Quiet conversations filled the room. Silverware reflected soft afternoon light. At the center of the room stood a large presentation screen displaying a single message. Leadership Development Initiative. Emily frowned. She had never heard of it. "Miss Carter," a woman approached with a welcoming smile. "We have been expecting you." Emily followed her to a reserved seat near the front. The name card placed there confirmed it. Emily Carter. There was no mistake. She belonged on the guest list. Yet she could not understand why. The room gradually quieted. A moderator stepped onto a small stage and welcomed everyone. He spoke about talent, potential, opportunity. Then he introduced the keynote speaker. "Please join me in welcoming Alexander Hayes." The room erupted into applause. Emily felt her breath catch. A familiar figure walked onto the stage. The same calm posture, the same silver watch, the same thoughtful eyes. The stranger from the café. For several seconds, Emily simply stared. Her mind refused to connect the image before her with the man who had spent afternoons drinking coffee by the window. Then the giant screen behind him lit up. Alexander Hayes, founder and chief executive officer. Hayes Global Holdings. Emily felt the world tilt. She had heard that name before. Everyone in New York had. One of the most successful business leaders in the country. The man whose companies employed tens of thousands of people. The billionaire whose estimated fortune exceeded $10 billion. Around her, Guests listened attentively as Alexander began speaking, but Emily barely heard the first few sentences. She was too busy replaying every conversation they had shared, every question, every smile, every quiet afternoon. Then, as if sensing her disbelief from across the room, Alexander's eyes briefly found hers. A small smile appeared, and in that moment, Emily realized the stranger had known exactly who she was all along. The luncheon ended, but Emily remained seated long after the applause faded. Around her, guests gathered in small groups, exchanging business cards and discussing opportunities. She barely noticed any of it. Her attention remained fixed on the man she thought she knew, Alexander Hayes, the quiet stranger who preferred window seats and simple coffee. The billionaire whose name appeared on skyscrapers, news programs, and business magazines across the country. Nothing made sense anymore. Yet somehow, everything did. The thoughtful questions, the calm confidence, the way he listened, the way he noticed details other people ignored. Emily was still processing it all when a member of the hotel staff approached her table. "Miss Carter, Mr. Hayes would like to speak with you privately." Her pulse quickened. She followed the employee through a series of quiet hallways until they reached a private conference room overlooking Central Park. The city stretched beyond the glass walls like a living map. Alexander stood near the window. For the first time since meeting him, he looked exactly like what he was. Not because of his suit, not because of the office tower visible behind him, because everyone around him seemed to move with the awareness that he carried influence wherever he went. Yet when he turned toward Emily, the familiar smile returned. "Thank you for coming." Emily folded her arms. "You could have told me who you were." Alexander nodded. "I could have. Why did you not?" He considered the question carefully. "Because I wanted our conversations to be honest." Emily looked away. Part of her wanted to be angry. Another part understood exactly what he meant. Most people probably treated Alexander Hayes differently the moment they learned his name. She certainly would have. "So what was all of this?" she asked quietly. "The invitations, the questions, the research." Alexander stepped closer to the conference table. "A few months ago, my company launched a leadership initiative. We were searching for people with talent, character, and resilience." Emily laughed nervously. "There are thousands of people more qualified than me." "Qualified?" Alexander smiled. "Perhaps." He opened a folder resting on the table. Inside were copies of academic awards, business projects, volunteer records, and employment history. Emily immediately recognized them. Fragments of the life she thought she had left behind. "Most candidates have impressive resumes," Alexander said. "Very few demonstrate integrity when nobody is watching." Emily stared at the papers. "You investigated me. I learned about you." His voice remained calm. "There is a difference." Silence filled the room. Beyond the glass, sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time all week. Alexander closed the folder. "The morning you spilled coffee on me, you offered to pay for the damage with money you clearly could not afford to lose. Not because you had to, because you believed it was the right thing to do." Emily lowered her eyes. She remembered that moment clearly. "That told me more than any interview ever could." Alexander slid a document across the table. "I am not offering charity, Emily." She looked down. It was an invitation to join a highly competitive leadership fellowship inside Hayes Global. 1 year. Full salary. Full training. Direct mentorship. An opportunity capable of changing an entire future. Emily read the first page twice. Then a third time. Her hands trembled slightly. "Why me?" she whispered. Alexander glanced toward the city skyline. Then back at her. "Because talent gets attention. Character earns trust. And trust is far more valuable." Emily stared at the document. The opportunity felt impossible. Yet for the first time in years, so did hope. Emily accepted the fellowship 3 days later. The decision terrified her. It also felt right. The months that followed were some of the hardest of her life. She was no longer carrying coffee trays across a crowded café. Now she was presenting ideas in conference rooms, studying market reports late into the evening, and learning from executives whose careers spanned decades. More than once, she questioned whether she belonged there. More than once, she considered giving up. But every time doubt appeared, she remembered the woman who had worked double shifts, paid bills one paycheck at a time, and refused to stop dreaming even when life became difficult. That woman had not disappeared. She was simply growing into someone new. Alexander kept his promise. He never treated Emily like a charity project. He challenged her. questioned her assumptions, pushed her to think deeper. Sometimes their discussions lasted 10 minutes, sometimes an hour. Yet the lesson was always the same. Opportunity could open a door. Only effort could carry someone through it. 1 year passed faster than either of them expected. Spring returned to Manhattan. Trees along Central Park bloomed once again. The fellowship concluded with a leadership conference attended by investors, executives, and business partners from across the country. Emily stood backstage waiting to deliver a presentation she had spent months preparing. Her hands trembled slightly. The familiar nervousness made her smile. Some things never changed. When her name was announced, she walked confidently onto the stage. The presentation lasted 20 minutes. She spoke about innovation, resilience, and the value of investing in overlooked talent. The audience listened carefully. When she finished, the room erupted into applause. Among the faces in the crowd, she spotted Alexander. He did not cheer louder than anyone else. He simply nodded once. A quiet gesture, yet somehow it meant more. After the event ended, guests filled the ballroom. Conversations echoed beneath crystal chandeliers. Emily slipped away for a moment of quiet and found herself standing beside a large window overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered beneath the evening sky. "Quite a year," a familiar voice said. She turned. Alexander stood beside her holding 2 cups of coffee. Emily laughed. "You planned that, did not you?" "Perhaps." He handed 1 cup to her. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply looked out across Manhattan. Finally, Emily glanced down at the coffee in her hands. "You know,"